Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is June the 1st, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner, and before we get into our program tonight, I want to say congratulations to our oldest grandchild, our only grandson, Tanner, on his graduation today from Aliso Niguel High School. And he's headed off to the University of Redlands in August, and we'll be playing water polo for them and has received a rather hefty academic scholarships. So we're super proud of him, and congratulations to Tanner. So just wanted to publicly brag a little bit about our grandson. So excited for this new season of life for him. Now, this past Tuesday, Terry and I actually had a wonderful opportunity to attend an event that was put on by Pastor Jack Hibbs from Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, dear brother in the Lord. Excuse me. And the event was called Come Back California. And I have to tell you, some of the things that we heard were just stunning. And I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out, if you will, to there were two speakers in the evening that were just exceptional. Kelly Shackelford, who is an attorney who brought us up to speed on many of the cases that have gone before the Supreme Court that basically the media is not covered because they were positive for the church and conservatives. And, just very interesting as far including the fact that the Ten Commandments and anything bearing Christian religious symbols and nativity scenes and the like are absolutely welcome on public property and city property as well. So don't let anybody tell you you can't put a nativity scene in front of City Hall or any of that. That is protected by our Constitution, and you absolutely can. And he went into rather significant detail about that particular case. And the other speaker in the evening, the speakers were great all day. It was just an incredible day. Lots of talk about school boards and the need for Christians to get involved. But I think kind of the proverbial icing on the cake and the bow around the whole event was the final speaker, Eric Metaxas. And he has written a book that I want to recommend to you. It's called Letter to the American Church. And I encourage you, go grab this. If you're an e-reader, I think you can get it in an ebook format. Go to Amazon or any online bookseller and you can grab it there. It's on the shelves of most major book-selling stores. So I just want to recommend it because what he talked about is the parallels between what Nazi Germany did and what the American government is doing. And the other thing that he pointed out is what the church didn't do in Nazi Germany and what the church is not doing now, and how they parallel one another. And the one of the recommendations for the book says that this book is like a bucket of cold water thrown into the face of a sleeping church. And it was just that. His talk was just incredible. And I encourage you. I don't think that it's going to be posted online. Some people have said otherwise online, but I don't think it's going to be posted anywhere because the content was rather sensitive and, church specific. So, anyway, I just want to encourage you to grab that book. And, the church needs a wake up call. And that's what this conference is all about, calling pastors to stand up, to wake up and stand up and get up and get going. And they talked about a lot of victories. And I have to tell you, some of the things going on, that we hear just generally, we're going to cover some of those stories tonight that turn our stomachs are just the icing on the cake, or the tip of the iceberg, I should say. I guess this is cliche and metaphor Thursday. But anyway, some of the things happening around our country and in California specifically, and one of the points was, California is the largest state in the union. There's just under 40 million people who live here. There's been a mass exodus from here, and that's because of the policies of the governor. And he seems to want to blame it on everything but himself, but it's his fault. He's doing this. He's the one that is causing the exodus to more conservative states like Texas and Florida. Many are moving to Arizona and other places. But, the reality is, California is doing a lot of things that remind us of what, Revelation 12:12 says, that woe to the earth, for the devil has come down to you. I'm not saying this event has happened because it is written about in the tribulation, but there is coming a time where Satan is thrown down to the earth. And the Revelation 12 says, woe to the earth and the inhabitants of the earth, because the devil has come down to you knowing he has but a short time. And I believe he knows full well, I think he knows the Bible better than many Christians. He knows full well that his time is running out. Israel is aging. All the events we see that are foretold by Jesus and others pertaining to the last days are happening all around us. The moment and twinkling of an eye experience for the dead in Christ and we who are alive and remain is at the door and perhaps could even happen today. But he has pulled out all the stops. And what is happening on school boards? One, they sit there with their faces smug and lie through their teeth about what they're doing in the public schools when they're forcing pornography on our kids and they're hiding things from parents. And it's just about as evil as you can get. And that's really what this conference was about, to tell the church, you know what, we can't just say, oh, it's not that bad. We can't sit there like the church did in Germany and say, well, they're really not going to take things that far. Yes, they did. And yes, they are today. They are bent on the destruction of the family and those in places of governmental power and many of those who follow after them. And the general consensus of all of these who spoke, and there were several attorneys spoke and representatives from agencies that inform the church about school boards and how to get involved there, all said the same thing. These people are demon possessed. There's no other way to describe it because it's beyond logical thinking. It makes no sense. I mean, it's not even a worldly type of goodness. And apart from Christ, there's good people in the world, good in the sense of, they don't harm other people. They think about other people and do those kind of things. But, in the biblical sense, of course, there's none good, no, not one. But we're not talking about being justified for salvation by your efforts. Just talking about general goodness. But these people have no goodness in them. They are evil. They are wicked. They are wanting to destroy our children and mutilate their little bodies and then not tell the parents about it, because according to our government, the children belong to all of us, not just the parents. So just interesting developments going on in our country. So again, just want to give a little shout out to Eric and show you once again this book, Letter to the American Church. I really, really encourage you to grab it. I don't know if it's on, I can't see it, if it's on camera or not. Yeah, there it is. So grab this book, and I think you'll be challenged and encouraged by it. So with that said, let's get on to our stories. And the first comes from the times of Israel. And again, there are things that we talk about that are precursors to events that will be fulfilled either later or during the tribulation. And some of them, I believe, will be fulfilled prior to the tribulation. It's very possible the Ezekiel war will start before the tribulation. I believe it will end after the rapture of the church and early in, or maybe even before the actual 7-year covenant is made. Very possible it could be the cause of the 7-year covenant. But anyway, this is one of those stories because it points to something that hasn't yet happened, but is an element that could cause it to move forward quickly. Israel's NewMed and partners connect the Aphrodite gas field off Cyprus to Egypt. New development plans presented for approval to the Cypriot government are expected to cut costs and bring forward a production start of natural gas from the reservoir. Partners in the Aphrodite natural gas field offshore of Cyprus, which include Israel's NewMed Energy, announced on Wednesday that they were seeking approval from the Cypriot government to build a subsea pipeline that will connect the field to an existing processing and production facility in Egypt. And what Egypt does is they turn the natural gas into a liquid so it can be shipped through pipelines into the European markets. And that's something to remember. And they own, Israel's NewMed Energy owns 30% in the Aphrodite field located in Cypriot waters, and said it had presented the Cypriot government with an updated plan for the development of the reservoir, including natural gas processing and production. For this purpose, the Aphrodite partners met with the Cypriot energy minister on Monday, to discuss the further development of the reservoir. And the other partners in the Aphrodite gas fields, which hold an estimated 124 billion cubic meters of gas, are U.S. energy giant Chevron and Shell, which each own a 35% share. And both Israel and Egypt have emerged as gas exporters in recent years. And remember, during in 1948, on May the 14th, when Israel declared its statehood, Egypt was the nation that led the charge against Israel. And yet the prophet Isaiah says that Egypt, Syria, and Israel will all be one during the millennium. And it's also interesting that in the Ezekiel invasion, Egypt, who led the charge in the initial war on the very eve of Israel's declared statehood. They were involved in the 67 and 73 in leading the charge in those battles as well, and were one of the nations that was fighting against Israel. And now here we've got cooperation between these two, and it's in the realm of energy-related products or natural gas. Both Israel and Egypt have emerged as gas exporters in recent years, following major offshore discoveries, as Europe is determined to wean itself off dependence on Russian gas imports. In June, Israel and Egypt signed a memorandum of understanding with the European Union that will see Israel export its natural gas to the bloc for the first time. Our next story follows up on the heels of our last, in that Globes reports that Israel recognizes Energene's Katlan gas discovery. The Minister of National Infrastructure's Energy and Water Resources, Israel Katz, has awarded to Energene's Matthias Regas the approval of the license in Block 12 Katlan Reservoir as a natural gas discovery. Katlan contains an estimated 68 billion cubic meters, and by law, this declaration now allows British Greek energy company Energene to file a development plan which, when approved, will enable it to begin developing the reservoir, which in several years will provide additional natural gas for the domestic market and perhaps even for export. Now, this is the first gas discovery recognized by the Israeli government since 2015, and the Katlan Olympus field is located between Energene's Karish and Tanin fields. Energene hopes to produce gas from the Katlan Olympus before developing Tanin because it can easily link the new field up to the nearby Karish field, which is already producing gas, and would not need to pay royalties to New Med Energy, which was forced to sell the field to Energene as part of the government's plan to introduce competition into Israel's natural gas sector. Now, again, this is interesting because two things. One, our first two stories pair them together, and here we've got this this Cypress Waters gas field, this massive reservoir, 124 billion cubic meters. And now here you've got this another gas field in the same region, and a Greek gas field. And, there's been a lot of talk from Turkey about who actually has rights to these gas fields. And, of course, the other article mentioned that Europe is trying to wean off of natural gas products or any type of energy related products from Russia. And so you've got Russia and Turkey, two major players in the invasion of Israel, who are going to invade Israel for economic reasons. That's very clear in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that that's why they're coming into the country, because the Saudis are going to protest and say, why, or along with the Arab Gulf states, why have you come? Have you come to take plunder and booty? They clearly recognize that the invasion is economically motivated, and Russia, and we're going to talk a little bit about Turkey's economy in a bit, but neither one of those countries can afford to have this type of one, loss of revenue for Turkey, and two, loss of revenue for Russia. Because remember, some 60% of their gross domestic product in Russia is related to energy production, whether that be petroleum products or natural gas. They cannot afford to lose market share in the European market, and Europe wants to, just rightfully so, but I think especially exacerbated by the Ukraine invasion. Sorry, a little brain cloud there for a minute. And looking at all that's gone on and how both Russia's economies in particular has been impacted by this through sanctions and other things, and people pulling away, from buying products from there. It's just very, very possible that this could be the catalyst that launches this invasion from the north by those nations named in the Ezekiel War scenario. And I think it's interesting, and this is what I said at the top of the program. These are things that point to something that is yet to come. And, now looking back, we can see throughout the course of history that there were things developing, regarding other seasons of life where, there was a flurry of major prophetic fulfillments and, things started pointing in that direction. The divided nation of Israel, the foretold Babylonian captivity, all of these things had things that were happening within the country that were indicating this trouble was coming, and God sent prophets to say that very thing. We have the whole of the Word of God, so we know the story from beginning to end. We know where all things started, we know where they're going and where they are, and we know where they're going to end. And God has very graciously given us His Word so we can be ready. And as my dear friend and now home with the Lord, Dr. Ed Heinzen used to say, prophecy is not meant to scare us, but to prepare us. And that's what we're talking about here. These are preparatory in what is coming and very possibly catalyst to the motivation to finally invade Israel from the north. We know that Turkey, Russia, and Iran, three of the major players in the invasion of Israel from the north, already have boots on the ground military personnel on the northern border of Israel as close as 40 miles away. So, you never know what's going to push that proverbial button or that straw on the camel's back, so to speak, that causes this invasion to take place. Libya and Sudan will be the other two nations that round out, the invading forces. And we don't see their involvement as of yet, but we do know that Sudan and Libya have an ideological alliance with Persia and Turkey, who are getting more and more extreme by the day. Now, Newsmax is reporting, and this kind of relates to Russia and what's been going on there with these energy-related products and what the potential is for pushing the prophetic narrative forward. Newsmax says Medvedev says UK politicians a legitimate military target. British politicians are a legitimate military target for the Kremlin, Russian Security Council Deputy Chair Dmitry Medvedev said on Wednesday after the UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly stated that Ukraine has the right to use force within the borders of Russia, Politico reported. Medvedev, a former president of Russia, wrote on Twitter that Great Britain acts as Ukraine's ally, providing it with military aid in the form of equipment and specialists, i.e., de facto, is leading an undeclared war against Russia. And that being the case, any of its public officials, either military or civil, who facilitate the war can be considered a legitimate military target. In the aftermath of drone strikes that hit Moscow's wealthiest neighborhoods, cleverly said that Ukraine has a right to use force beyond its own borders as part of its self-defense, according to Politico. The foreign secretary contended that Kiev attacking inside Russia would undermine Moscow's ability to continue its war in Ukraine, which has officially denied responsibility for the drone attacks. Medvedev, who has also called for the killing of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, warned in his Twitter message that the goofy officials of the UK, our eternal enemy, should remember that within the framework of the universally accepted international law, which regulates modern warfare, including the Hague and Geneva Conventions, with their additional protocols, their state can also be qualified as being at war. The U.S. does not appear to share the U.K.'s view of the situation, Politico reported. And White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said at a briefing on Tuesday that the U.S. was continuing to collect information on the reports of drones hitting Moscow, but made clear that we do not support attacks inside of Russia. That's it, period. Now, this just tells us again how ridiculous the world has become and how bizarre the thinking is in the world. And for the spokesman, the White House press secretary, the spokesman, so to speak, or the face or voice of the United States to go out publicly and say, we do not support attacks inside of Russia. And that's the equivalent, military equivalent, of saying it's not fair if you fight back. Now, Russia has invaded Ukraine and is killing Ukrainian people and soldiers. And just the whole idea that it's preposterous to think that Ukraine could turn and do in kind to Russia. And this kind of thinking is just so bizarre. And that's the same kind of thinking we see employed with the nation of Israel. When the Palestinians launch over 1,000 rockets in the matter of a few days, and Israel fires back because they have high-tech weapons and things of that nature, the international community cries out, "Oh, foul, foul!" It's unfair. The Palestinians launched 1,000 rockets, which were largely ineffective, and Israel does not have the right for precision strikes and to take out these places where the Palestinians, many times will put their rocket launchers next to a school or a hospital and try and point the finger at Israel for taking it out in close proximity to a place where kids are or people are recovering or sick. And again, just this mindset is the delusional thinking of the world today. And it's just like that everywhere. It's rampant everywhere. And, to say something so ridiculous, that coming from the United States press secretary, that we do not support attacks inside of Russia. And yet we're sending materials to um, and soldiers, consultants, they're under the guise of that, are being sent to the Ukrainian people, as well as weaponry and things of that nature. But they don't want to use it against the people that are attacking them. Again, it just doesn't make any sense, and it falls right in line with the just the loss of rational thought. The Bible says is going to happen in the last days, and we are in the throes of it. Now, this story is kind of interesting because I found it on a website called All Arab News. And the headline reads, "The Tyrant of Turkey. Could Erdogan's win have prophetic implications?" This is on All Arab News. Now, the other interesting thing about this is the article that they published was written by Joel Rosenberg, a Jew. And the article says, "It is troubling that Russia and Iran were the first to congratulate." Is it troubling that Russia and Iran were the first to congratulate Erdogan? You bet it is. With the alleged re-election of Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Sunday, the country is in the news this week. And guess who was the first to congratulate him? Rosenberg asked. If you guessed Russian President Vladimir Putin, you're right. Putin called Erdogan his, quote, dear friend, end quote. One of the next world leaders to congratulate Erdogan was Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Should that trouble you? You bet it should. Most people, including most evangelicals, aren't paying Turkey or its corrupt leadership much attention. Oh, we are. But you ought to, and here's why. First, Turkey is a militarily important given that it has the population of 85 million and the biggest army of all in NATO. Second, Turkey is geographically important, strategically positioned at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, just south of Russia and just north of Israel. Third, Turkey, known in ancient times as Asia Minor, is biblically important, the place where the Apostle Paul used to preach the gospel, plant churches, and write epistles in the first century. Fourth, Turkey is prophetically important. The first several chapters of the book of Revelation were written to people living in ancient Turkey. The seven churches were all in Asia Minor. What's more, Turkey plays a key role in another major biblical prophecy that will come to pass in the last days of the history before the second coming of Christ. Modern Turkey is very, very serious trouble, and President Erdogan is the reason. This is a dangerous man. He has no idea, and again, this is in the All Arab News. He has no idea how to lead a country in a healthy, democratic, and free direction, and the people of Turkey are suffering, just like the Iranians. It's just a small handful of people that are in charge, which is what's going to happen in the end during the tribulation period. The Antichrist and his cronies are going to rule and dominate the whole of the world. In Turkey, food prices have soared, gas prices have soared. Sound familiar? All prices have soared. And last year, Erdogan's policy caused inflation in Turkey to hit 85%, 10 times higher than the U.S. Throughout the recent campaign, Erdogan has been saying, don't worry, things are getting better. Well, in April, prices in Turkey only went up by 50% instead of 85%. In May, the Turkish inflation rate was even better, clocking in around 45% and not 50%. And over the past 5 years, the value of the Turkish currency, known as the lira, has plunged by 77%, and it just keeps falling. This week, the lira hit an all-time record low against the dollar. Now, let me take your mind back to what we talked about in the beginning. These waters that are in question and these gas fields that are found, uh, would bring income into both the Turkish and Russian economies. And they are the number one and number two players. Well, let me rephrase that. I think they are the number one and number one players. Most of the names given from the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10, giving us geographic markers as to where the nations are going to come from that are going to invade Israel. We can study historians like Herodotus and others and see basically the geographic regions represented by those names of the descendants of Noah, Gomer, Beth Togarmah, things like that. Uh, Magog, uh, all names of descendants of Noah and his three sons found in Genesis chapter 10. But we know through the course of history, we can study where they settled and thus know where these geographic regions are that are going to invade Israel from the north. And most of the nations that are named, or most of the names that point to nations, I should say, in Ezekiel 38 are in relation to Asia Minor, Turkey specifically. So interesting to see these two things happening now and continuing to move forward. You know, it's interesting when Israel first discovered the Leviathan gas field. It's got something like 3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off the coast of Haifa in Israel. And Russia right away offered to help them protect their derricks off the coast that are mining this natural gas, as well as get it to market for them, and even help them build the pipeline. This was the offer that came from Russia because they immediately saw the potential threat to their own economy and thus their ability to finance their war machine. So, you know, we see now Erdogan, who is a Sunni Muslim, is increasingly making it clear, the article says, that he's a radical Islamist. He's not a democratically elected leader, but a demagogic dictator, a man who sees himself as the Sultan of a neo-Ottoman empire. Now, here you've got, you know, all of these people that are named, or three of the five nations that are named in the Ezekiel invasion. You've got Russia and a leader who wants to see the restoration of Mother Russia and its glory days. You've got Erdogan, who wants to see the rebirth of the Ottoman Empire with he himself as Sultan. And then you've got the Iranians or the Persians who want to establish a global caliphate with Shia Islam in charge of the world. And you've got these ego monsters all abusing their people, invading other nations, exporting terrorism, financing proxy terrorist groups like Iran does. And all of them are going to join together against the nation of Israel. But let me remind you, the Lord in Zechariah, in Ezekiel 39, the Lord fights back and he destroys these nations. And the only translation that I'm aware of that gives an actual specific percentage is the King James. It says 5/6 of the invading armies are going to lie dead on the mountains of Israel. 5/6 of those who invade Israel from the north are going to lie dead on the mountains of Israel, and it's going to take 7 months for the men, professional men, to bury the dead. So, and God is going to have rain and hailstones of fire mingled with blood, and the typical way that God fights doesn't necessarily require any type of nuclear weapon or anything human for that matter. God is going to fight on behalf of Israel. And now we're seeing again just these advancements of potential advancements of the Ezekiel war scenario breaking out possibly at any moment. Now, again, because of what I just said, you know, this supernatural intervention where God fights on behalf of Israel and he uses his arsenal of weaponry to fight against them. That's why I believe that the battle, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 battle, will actually end after the rapture of the church, because it's only then that God begins to go on the offensive. He's been defending Israel. He's been protecting them. We see these thousands and thousands of missiles that have been fired into Israel with relatively, by comparison, small amounts of damage, and thankfully, even small amounts of loss of human life. And any human life loss, obviously, is tragic. And but you know, God has been defending Israel. But during the tribulation, He's going to go on the offensive, and He's going to begin to open up his weapons cache. And I think it's interesting, especially in Job chapter 38, where Job is being questioned by God, and he says, he's going to uh, hear God's answer, and the Lord takes him back to his authority and power as creator. And he asked Job, "Have you seen the treasury of snow I've reserved for the time of the end?" And God has his weapons and hail as well, and his weapons, are not of this world. God doesn't need puny nuclear weapons to get the job done. He can handle it himself. Just ask the ancient Egyptians. Now, the expose is reporting that the destruction, listen to this again, the world has lost its mind. And these people that ought to be arrested and locked up or at least put in a psych ward are the people making decisions that impact the whole world. Listen to this: destruction of farming is front and center in the fight against climate change, according to John Kerry. John Kerry, the multimillionaire climate doomsday cultist and U.S. special presidential envoy for climate, recently admitted that the destruction of the agriculture industry, livestock farming in particular, is essential to achieve net zero. Agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions in the world. And we can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution. A warmer climate could result in an additional 600 million people not getting enough to eat, and you just can't continue to both warm the planet while also expecting to feed. It doesn't work. Kerry's narrative to starve people by cutting off their food supplies to save people from starving seems bizarre. No, it's not bizarre. It's nutty. It's wacko. I mean, what a stupid thing to say and do. And, again, these people that are in places of power, it's downright scary that somebody hasn't put a pair of cuffs on them or one of those jackets and tie in the back and thrown them in a padded room. This kind of talk is just insane. He says agriculture contributes about 33% of the emissions of the world. Well, it contributes a lot more, a lot stronger percentage of the world's food. And, we do need to eat, John. And I'm sure you're not missing any meals when you fly around on your private jet to get from place to place to talk about how the rest of us ought to be walking or riding a bike. All these ridiculous things. It's just the world has lost its mind. And people keep I think the most troubling thing for me, I always go back to the same thing, that people are voting for these people. That's the scary thing. People are voting for people who do such stupid things over and over and over. And anymore, it's sad to say, I don't know that we can trust elections here in the United States anymore. And I think we've just fallen in suit with what's been going on in other parts of the world for a long time. Like Erdogan, here he is, even with all of the ballot stuffing and the other things that they know took place in Turkey during this recent election. He still only got 52% of the vote in a runoff, and the other candidate got 48%. And, the people want him out of there. And, to win by a narrow margin like that, and having been in power now for 20 years, and just the people can't stand him. The people want him gone. But, the people don't have a voice anymore in many parts of the world. And sadly, I think that to a degree has visited these United States as well. And the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Summit brought together partners worldwide to drive rapid and transformative climate action. AIM 4C is a joint initiative by the U.S. and the UAE, and the summit is the premier global event for the partners, by the partners, that will provide a game-changing platform for AIM for climate partners to raise ambition and amplify their work in climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation. That's why we're hearing about this lab-grown beef and printed meats and all these other things. It's just ridiculous, the things that are being said. And the curious thing is the number one climate offender is China, and nobody says a word to them. And let's go after, and by the way, the largest landholder of American farmland, landowner of American farmland, is Bill Gates, the population reduction guy. and the vaccine guy. Yeah. So, what's going on out there is just, it's beyond belief. But, the Lord said through Paul, in the last days, perilous times will come. And the first human character flaw that he named is men will be lovers of themselves. And that's what we see going on today. Now, the Gateway Pundit says that a Chicago Pride event will feature drag, dress up, and makeovers for children. Now, get this, it's sponsored by Lululemon. Lululemon is sponsoring this event. So put them on the list with Target and any others. Kohl's, I guess, has jumped on the trans and queer bandwagon now. And, all these things. And, these things matter. When somebody's in the profit making business and they have shareholders and their shareholders stop making a profit and start losing money, things will turn around. So, you know what? Don't shop at these places. Don't go to Target. Don't go to Kohl's. Don't buy anything from Lululemon. And Chicago's Queer Fam Pride Jam Pride event will feature drag, dress up, and makeovers for children. The event will take place June 17th at the Salt Shed Fairgrounds from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and is sponsored by Lululemon. According to a report from Block Club Chicago, this free event, co-sponsored by Block Club, is a collaboration between queer party producers of Slow Mo and the owners of Kiddo, an award-winning kids boutique in the South Loop. The event will also feature vendors prioritizing those who are LGBTQ and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The festival's programs include wellness activities facilitated by LGBTQ artists and healers, including family yoga and fan decorating, Kaza said. Day-long activities include fan decorating, drag dress up, and makeovers. The report continues, and Natty Boy Bikes and Boards, a local skateboard school, will facilitate a skating area, and legendary house music choreographer Boogie McLaren will teach dance lessons, Kaza said. The event will culminate in an all ages dance party. The dance party will put all these components together. Kiddo owner Kiva Narula told Block Club they'll have learned the dances, they'll have drag artwork on their face, and they'll have had an entire day of fun to celebrate. Kiddo, a children's boutique, has also previously organized a pro-abortion march. I think just again, and this was mentioned over and over at the Comeback California conference, if just the church, only the church, forget anybody else, forget any conservative people, because the church and conservatives are not the same thing. I think they share a lot of political values, but they are two separate entities. And the church is the church. We are the body of Christ with a singular mission of preaching the gospel to every creature and being salt and light, or the preserving and truth bearers of the world. And there comes a time where we got to stand up against the stuff that's going on and vote with our wallet, because these are businesses. And when businesses hurt, they're not all as foolish as Bud Light and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and nor are they all as stupid as Target, and who go from the mixed gender bathrooms to now this whole movement with the trans apparel right out in front of the store, pushing it down people's throats and all of that. And it's funny to hear how many times out of the liberal community they talk about conservatives wanting to cram their values down people's throats. Well, you don't see anything that would be representative of conservatism out at front in Target. It's always the liberal agenda that's being shoved down people's throats. Now, the Gateway Pundit also says, listen to this one. MSNBC guest claims conservatives boycotting Target is literally terrorism. And MSNBC guest claim that conservatives boycotting Target and other major corporations is literally terrorism, with no pushback from the host or network. Economics professor Justin Wolfers made the bold assertion during an appearance on MSNBC Thursday. Well, of course he would on that station. Look, one of two things is true, Wolfers began. It could be that they're cowards and use that as protection and smoke screen so that they could make a cowardly decision. Or it could be that they're actually genuinely concerned about the well-being of their employees and have had credible threats. The retail giant has lost $10 billion in 10 days amid a conservative boycott over pride-themed clothing for children. The professor claimed that the boycott being effective in getting them to change its policies would be economic terrorism. As banks fail and Americans scramble to protect retirement accounts with physical gold and silver, a faith based company shows them how. I'm sorry, I just read an advertisement that I should have deleted from the article. And when Target caves into this, then it says that the moment you threaten the employees of even a very large corporation, you get to control its policies. Well, that's what they've been doing. It's just, again, just insane. This is economic terrorism, literally terrorism, Wolfers said. The New York Post reported a week ago Wednesday, Target enjoyed its stock value at $160.96 a share, but following the calls to boycott the Minneapolis-based retailer over its Pride collection, the value plummeted and closed Friday at $138.93 per share. That's a 22% drop in value for the blue chip stock and roughly translates into $10.1 billion loss in valuation to just $64.2 billion for Target, which has nearly 2,000 stores nationwide. Well, you can say what you want, but good for those who quit going to Target because it is impacting them and making a choice. And again, the reportedly the number of people in the United States who are Christians, who claim to be Christians, falls. I've heard numbers as high as 90 million, and I've also heard as low as 60 million. Can you imagine 60 million people? Let's just cut it in half. Let's say 70 million people, 75 million people, the halfway point between 60 and 90. Imagine if 75 million people were unified in their cause. Uh, Nobody could stop them. And this is what this conference was all about. Let's quit saying stupid things like we shouldn't be involved in politics. Listen, mutilating children is not political, that's moral. The LGBTQ agenda is not political, it's moral. The redefining of marriage is not political, it's moral. These are moral issues, and the church is to stand for morality. That's what being salt and light is. We are preserving and purifying influence. That's what Jesus has called us to be. And the whole thing, and over and over and over, we heard pleadings, and even from a state senator in California, she was pleading with pastors, speak up. And she said over and over, please, 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 I beg you, start speaking up on these issues. And we need to have our voice heard. Why? Because they're taking our children. They took over the universities and took over their minds, and now they're trying to destroy their little bodies. And Eric Metaxas said, God is going to hold us accountable for our inaction. And my mind immediately went to Proverbs 24:11 and 12, where we're told to rescue those who are drawn towards death, hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. Now listen close. If we say we did not know this, he who weighs the heart will perceive it, and he who keeps your soul will know it, and will render to each one according to their deeds. It does matter to God. We should stand up. We should be proactive against these things. And, as Metaxas, that's the three strikes I'm out, I guess, said, everything that the church didn't do in Nazi Germany, the church isn't doing today by and large. So we need to stand up. And if all you can do is vote with your wallet, then do that, because it does matter. It does have an impact. Now, there's a website that I like that it's got an interesting name. It's called the New Tang Dynasty. And I wanted to know exactly what that was all about. So I dug into what their stand is about. And basically, they're people who have come out of communist China. And they enjoy the freedom of the press that we have here. And they speak out very directly and radically against anything that smacks of communism that's making headway here in the United States. And the New Tang Dynasty reports that feminist protests against transgender athletes policy in California. Women's rights advocates held a protest against the California Interscholastic Federations, or CIF, gender policy on May 27th at a high school competition, even though two transgender athletes had withdrawn from the race. The policy or interpretation of the policy would allow transgender athletes who are biological males to attend female races in state track and field championships. Protesters from Women's Declaration International USA and Women Are Real displayed banners reading womenarereal.com, protect female sports, and speak up for girls when the girls' 1600-meter race began on May 27th at Veterans Memorial Stadium at Buchanan High School in Clovis, California. The girls' 1600-meter was the race that the transgender athletes Athena Ryan from Sonoma Academy and Lorelei Barrett from Sherman Oaks Buckley were supposed to attend. However, they both decided not to participate, according to the LA Times. And the protest was quickly cut short, and protesters were slowly escorted out of the compound with banners in their hand. Now, again, one thing I think that the church needs to be more vocal on is reality. And the curious thing I think about all this, the things that makes you scratch your head, is that this is the trust the science crowd that is saying women can be men and men can be women just because they think they are. It doesn't change anything chromosomally or biologically. You are what you are, and that's that. And you can't make the hermaphrodite argument because those are anomalies in the norm, and they are not another sex. They're a mutation of the normal sex construct, be it biologically or chromosomal. And again, just this whole idea that a biological male who's physically a male in every single way can run in a women's event or swim in a women's event or do anything in a women's event just because they think they're a woman is beyond ridiculous. And it just needs to stop. And good for these who are standing up against such things. Now, American Military News, I wanted to throw this in. This is another website I visit frequently, just because, and I will say, I believe this is where our country's headed. American Military News says Marines brutally beaten by a mob of teenagers in California. A mob of teenagers attacked, and we see videos about this all the time. Every single week, there's some kind of video popping up about teenagers beating somebody up or punching somebody, and just the level of anger that's being created in our country by these liberals that are pointing fingers at conservatives as being terrorists. A mob of teenagers attacked at least 2 United States Marines on Memorial Day weekend in San Clemente, California. Video of the incidents shows dozens of teenagers beating 2 self-identified service members as they curl up in the fetal position in an attempt to shield themselves from a flurry of punches and kicks. This is considered an assault with a deadly weapon because of the amount of suspects we're investigating, Orange County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Frank Gonzalez said, according to KCAL News. The weapons that were used were their feet while the victims were on the ground. So regardless if the victims chose prosecution or choose medical attention, the Sheriff's Department is going to investigate this to the fullest and try to determine who the suspects are. And one of the Marines, Hunter Antonio, told the outlet that the assailants stomped on them. The attack was stopped when an older man and woman stepped in. Another video of the incident shows one of the teens punching one of the Marines in the back of the head while he's walking away from the mob. Now, this is kind of where we're at right now. The investigator said we're pursuing these and identifying them. He went on to say his name is Woodruff. And regardless of whether you're a juvenile or adult, you're still responsible to the law, he added. And for those who violated the law in this incident, investigations are going to pursue who they are and at that point go from there. And if charges get pressed, they'll get pressed. And again, just this whole mob mentality, we've seen it with Antifa and their feigned outrage and burning down businesses. And we saw Portland as probably the poster city for that as an example. And just ridiculous things going on. And, here's another story along the same lines. Breitbart says police report that 2 pro-life advocates were beaten outside Planned Parenthood in Baltimore. I saw their pictures. They were brutally beaten. And the 2 pro-life advocates were attacked outside of Planned Parenthood in Baltimore, Maryland on Friday morning. Police said the attack happened just before 10:30 a.m. at the clinic along North Howard Street, according to the police. The two victims are both men, 73 and 80 years old. What a bunch of cowards. And, one of the interesting things that I've always found, Revelation 28 gives a list of character attributes that are responsible for sending people to hell, sinful behaviors, if you will, unrepentant sinful behaviors. We're all sinners, but some sinners have been forgiven because they've trusted in Christ. But, the first human character trait that is identified in Revelation 21:8 of those who are cast into the lake of fire is the cowardly. God just seems to have a specific aggravation towards the coward and those who would, and that's, I think, right in line with what Jesus said about those who would cause children to stumble. Be better if they had a millstone tied around their neck and they were cast into the sea than to cause children to stumble. These people beat up a 73 and 80-year-old men, and their faces were just brutalized. I saw one of the man's faces, and it looked like a mask. His face was so swollen and like some type of Halloween mask. He was beaten so badly. And LifeSite News first reported of the incident on Saturday, and local pro-lifer John Roswell told the outlet via email that Dick Schaefer and Mark Crosby are the men who were allegedly attacked and seriously injured. No, allegedly, they were attacked. The pro-life outlet obtained photographs of what appear to be facial injuries. Roswell said that Schaefer is recovering at home and Crosby was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Detailing the extent of the injuries, Roswell wrote that Crosby's plate bone in his upper right cheek is completely fractured and that he is bleeding from some unidentified area behind his eye, and the bone eye orbit is completely shattered and will have to be replaced with metal, according to the report. Again, this is 73 and 80-year-old men who are outside an abortion clinic. And it doesn't say what they were doing, but most likely, like most people do outside an abortion clinic, they were praying, and would be my guess. But again, 73 and 80 years old. What kind of human beats up and damages the face so brutally? Here the last sentence in the article says he was praying in front of Planned Parenthood. Beaten to a pulp for praying, so much so that he'll require facial surgery. Just unbelievable. What kind of human being does that? Well, I'll tell you what kind. It's a coward does that kind of thing. The Associated French Press says, now this is interesting, and we'll end with this. NASA holds once hostile, NASA holds first public meeting on UFOs. Scientists at NASA's first ever public meeting on unidentified anomalous phenomenon, more commonly called UFOs, have called for a more rigorous scientific approach to clarify the origin of hundreds of mysterious sightings. The truth is out there, but we're going to need to look harder. Scientists at NASA's first ever public meeting on unidentified anomalous phenomenon, and the space agency there announced last year was analyzing observations in the sky that can't be identified as aerial or natural phenomenon, a subject that has long fascinated the public but been shunned by mainstream science. The independent team of 16 scientists are due to report on their findings in a report by the end of July, with Wednesday's working meeting a forum for its final deliberations. The current existing data and eyewitness reports alone are insufficient to provide conclusive evidence, astrophysicist David Spergel, chair of the study, said in live-streamed remarks. Now, I think this is interesting, and especially, when you throw out, if you want, to a degree, to lend some type of credibility to your findings as it relates to events out in space, you throw NASA out there. And people are instantly going to say, oh, well, that's a trustworthy source. But here's why I wanted to end with that article. I don't know about you, but I've been seeing so many things out there about UFOs, UFO sighting, videos popping up all over the place about this UFO, that UFO, all these things happening all over the place, and being reported as valid sightings, and the footage, some obviously you can tell some of it is just manufactured and photoshopped or whatever. But, it just made me wondering, the reason I wanted to report on this story with NASA jumping in, are they getting ready to explain the rapture? That's long been one of the potential. People often ask the question, how is the world going to explain the rapture of the church? Well, some say it's very possible that UFOs coming and snatching away the undesirables. One of the explanations is the universe is cleansing itself of the unwanted and undesirables. And some make the argument that it does that every now and then. Since the universe is self-created, it also self-cleans, basically, is their argument. But, one of the more popular, I think, is this idea that UFOs came and took away all these ugly people and got us out of there. And then it leaves the world in the condition we see described in Revelation 6 through 19. So just a possibility again. And I wanted to throw that out there because, it's a frequently asked question, as I said, but it's awful curious that in harmony or in concert with all the other things that we see going on right now, there's all of a sudden just UFO stories everywhere and motherships, behind the moon and all this stuff. And people are going on and on and on about these things. And so now NASA jumps in and says, we need to give another look at this, a more serious look at this, and throw a team of scientists at it. So that's it for this week. And again, thank you for joining us. And, again, I encourage you, get this letter to the American Church from Eric Metaxas. And I think you'll be blessed and challenged by it. And I found this to be a very challenging conference, kind of throwing the gauntlet down to get with it and do more and fight for, the people. That's what we're fighting for. We're not fighting, for the Republican Party. We're not fighting against the Democrat Party. We're not fighting for the Democrat Party. We're fighting against evil. We're fighting against Satan. And it doesn't matter, what the political affiliation is. That's irrelevant. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and rulers of darkness. That's our adversary. And as Revelation 12 talks about, Peter talks about in 1 Peter 5:8, that our adversary, the devil, roams the earth like a roaring lion. That's who we're fighting against. And he's seeking to devour our children. And we need to stand up because this is not about politics. This is a moral issue. And that's what the church is here for, to preach Christ and him crucified and the fact that we're all sinners who need a Savior. And so, again, I hope you've been encouraged a bit. And, we're talking about tough stuff. And I see comments every week that somebody or a few people mention, some of these things are hard to listen to. And yes, they are. Absolutely. But we live in perilous times, which should tell us that we're near the end. And, I don't think we need to be hesitant about near the end. And the fact that there's scoffers who say we don't know if we're at the end or not, it tells us we're near the end. Things are wrapping up. They can't continue in the direction that they're going, and God is going to intervene. He said he would. And, I mentioned this scenario multiple times, but, if you look at Isaiah chapter 2 and the fact that there's a mention of what's stated directly in Revelation chapter 6, that there's coming a time when the Lord shakes the earth, that people are going to hide in the holes of the earth. There'd be a cave, and call on the rocks of the mountains to hide them from the wrath of him who sits on the throne. And, when all that is going to happen is a time where the Lord is going to allow incompetent leadership, even children, to rise up and be in places of authority. And then the famed verse in chapter 5, verse 20 says that woe to those who call good evil and evil good. And woes are coming, to be sure. So we need to stand up against these things for the children's sake. And certainly the side benefit will be a better country, because the truth is, historically speaking, it cannot be denied that wherever Christianity has been allowed to flourish, so is the country. Well, we're not flourishing anymore because the church has basically been trampled underfoot by men, as Jesus foretold, because we've stopped being salt and light. No, we need to stand up and speak up and vote with our wallets and our feet, and let them know we're not going to let them take our children, because children are a heritage from the Lord. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you for joining us. And just keep praying. And again, so excited for my grandson. And I know this is graduation season for people all over the country, and just exciting to see your grandkids now grow up. We already went through this once with our kids, and now here we've got round two with our grandkids. Starting off with our, as my wife calls him, our one prince, our only grandson. And we're super proud of him and blessed for proud of him as an athlete, and the school pursuing several schools pursuing him to be part of their polo program. But on his Letterman's jacket that he's worn since he was a freshman, my favorite patch on his sleeve is Scholar Athlete. He's a smart kid, and just super proud of him. So, well, that's enough of my bragging. So, hope you have a good week, and the Lord bless you, and we'll see you here, there, or in the air.